In this lesson, we will begin to look at many of the important changes that took place in the social and economic life of Europe from the 1500s through the 1700s. We will focus on several key developments in this lesson. First, we will look at the population of Europe and examine the reasons why it decreased in the 1600s and then dramatically increased in the 1700s. Next, we will look at the causes and results of the witchcraft craze that swept Europe in the 1500s and 1600s. We will then examine the Consumer Revolution, when wealthy Europeans began to enjoy a greater variety of luxury goods as a result of the expansion of global trade in the 1700s. Next, we will discuss how warfare changed due to the development of stronger monarchies and professional armies. Finally, we will see how Western and Eastern Europe continued to diverge economically and socially during this period. By the end of the 15th century, Europe was entering a new age of economic expansion that contrasted sharply with the decline that had taken place in the 14th century as a result of famines, plagues, and wars. The key development in the period was the growth of the population. In the century after the Black Death, France's population, for example, nearly doubled, reaching as high as 20 million by 1550. This expansion of the population was important for boosting economic productivity, since most labor was done by human muscle power rather than through technology. A larger population also meant more consumers, which created greater demand for food and other goods. The growth in population also contributed to one of the most important economic developments of the 1600s, a significant increase in the rise in prices, or inflation, which historians have called the price revolution. For a long time, historians thought this increase was the result of the massive influx of precious metals from the New World. Although this certainly made the situation worse, most scholars now agree that the growth in population was the major factor because it put pressure on the limited productive capacity of Europe's farms and workshops, which then led to higher prices. Though the increase in prices took place slowly and over an extended period of time, Europeans were used to stable prices, and even a gradual increase could be disruptive. Some historians even argued that the price revolution may have contributed to the social, political, and religious tensions of the period. The population growth of the 1550s slowed and even reversed in some areas by the mid-1600s. The religious wars unleashed by the Reformation contributed to this, especially in Germany, which was devastated by the 30 Years' War. Overseas expansion and wars led to higher taxes, which eventually caused families to have fewer children due to more limited resources. Changes in climate may have played a role as well. Historians have recently begun to argue that a major influence on the European population during this period was climate change. The mid-1600s saw the beginning of what historians have called Europe's Little Ice Age, which lasted to about 1715. During the Little Ice Age, Europe suffered from unusually low temperatures and wet weather that limited growing seasons and agricultural productivity. The rise of the population in the 1500s and its decline in the 1600s reflected the persistence of a terrible cycle in European history that is sometimes called by scholars the Malthusian trap, after Thomas Malthus, the 18th century British political economist, who first seriously analyzed the connection between population and resources. According to this model, population growth inevitably leads to a strain on the available resources. This leads to war, famine, and disease, which reduce the population for a while. Eventually, the population starts to grow again, and the cycle is repeated. In the 18th century, the European population began to steadily increase again. From 1720, when the growth in population really began, to the start of the French Revolution in 1789, Europe's population increased from about 120 to 180 million. France saw one of the biggest increases in population in the 1700s, from 18 million in 1715 to 26 million in 1789. This growth put tremendous pressure on French farmland and played an important role in the French Revolution. England experienced a large increase as well, climbing from 6 million in 1715 to more than 10 million by 1800. Although all of Europe took part in population growth, the increase tended to be smaller and more gradual in Eastern Europe. The exception was Russia, which surpassed France as the most populous nation in Europe by around 1780. Urban areas grew the fastest, often straining their still primitive infrastructure of roads, housing, waste removal, and charity. Historians still debate the reasons for the growth of the European population in the 18th century. In England and the Netherlands, new and more efficient methods of farming were introduced that boosted food production. Cheap and nutritious crops from the Americas, like potatoes, were being more widely used, which meant a larger and healthier food supply. The end of the Little Ice Age meant a longer growing season and more reliable crops, though the effects varied by region. Some places, like France, still experienced streaks of bad weather and crop shortages throughout the 1700s. The building of roads and canals by royal governments in order to improve trade had the added benefit of making it easier to address local shortages of grain by moving food more easily between different locations. Changes in warfare also helped. Instead of vicious religious wars that affected wide areas, 18th century wars were fought by professional armies with specific geographic and economic objectives. These wars, therefore, were less destructive and had less of an impact on civilian populations. Some diseases, like the Black Death, disappeared from Europe, while others were defeated by new breakthroughs in medical care, such as Edward Jenner's inoculation against smallpox. Most scholars agree that the population growth of the 18th century was not due to rising birth rates, but rather a decrease in death rates. In most areas of Europe in the 1700s, couples were still getting married at later ages and having fewer children. The exception was England, where changes in land ownership, new technology, and new methods of farming may have encouraged earlier marriage and a rise in the birth rate. This may explain why Britain experienced a greater overall population increase than other areas of Europe in the 1700s. Historians sometimes argue that the 18th century was the start of the so-called vital revolution. This term refers to the demographic shift that took place in Western European society beginning in the 1700s. In this period, birth and death rates became more stable as a result of improvements in medicine, hygiene, and diet that extended life expectancy and limited infant and child mortality. The vital revolution continued through the next few centuries and was expanded by new scientific discoveries and material improvements following the Industrial Revolution. Belief in witchcraft and black magic have been common throughout the Middle Ages. The early modern period witnessed what historians call a witchcraft craze. During this time, accusations of witchcraft increased dramatically, as did persecution of people suspected of witchcraft. During the 1500s and 1600s, it is estimated that somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 people were officially tried for witchcraft, and between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for practicing witchcraft. Though some men were accused of witchcraft, the majority of victims were women. The rise in witchcraft accusations is attributed by historians to several factors. The most immediate cause may have been the religious conflicts unleashed by the Reformation. In the 16th and 17th centuries, almost all Europeans, even the educated, believed in witches, demons, and the devil. The Reformation created an even more intense climate of religious passion and increased concerns about the power of the devil. Traditionally negative perceptions of women contributed to their being accused of witchcraft. The perception of women as weak and emotional caused many men to view them as more susceptible to the temptations of the devil. Since pacts with the devil meant the rejection of God, witchcraft was considered heresy. Women's work often made them vulnerable to charges of witchcraft because they usually prepared food and traditional herbal medicines, as well as cared for children and animals. Therefore, when famine or diseases struck, or when animals and children became sick or died without a reasonable explanation, women could be blamed. Older, widowed women had little power and few rights, and so became convenient scapegoats when a crisis struck a town or village. The religious, social, and economic changes of the time certainly played a major role. These changes tended to undermine or challenge traditional life. Loss of land, religious wars, poverty, crime, and overpopulation all put strains on the economic and social system, creating a climate of fear, uncertainty, and anger. In such an environment, it was much easier to lash out against vulnerable members of the community. Once one person was identified as a witch, fear, anxiety, and jealousy frequently led to more accusations, and then a hysterical hunt for witches that would gradually subside as the crisis passed. Once accused, an alleged witch would be tried by religious or civil authorities, and confessions would be gained through torture or the threat of torture. The expansion of the modern state in the 1600s probably made the problem worse by creating more formal courts and judicial procedures to handle witchcraft accusations. As state power grew, What in the Middle Ages might have been confined to a local area now became a national concern. The printing press made the process of accusing and identifying witches easier by publishing books about witchcraft. One of the best-selling books in the 1480s was the Malleus Maleficarum. This text served as a handbook on the examination and identification of witches and was widely used throughout Europe. Widespread witch hunting gradually came to an end in the late 17th century. The end of the religious wars and the rise of absolutist governments contributed to this by restoring some stability. The scientific revolution and enlightenment played an even more important role by emphasizing reason and laws of nature. Superstition and belief in witchcraft declined among educated Europeans, who now turned their attention away from religion and toward scientific thought and rational explanations for events. Though witchcraft continued to be practiced and persecuted in some areas, it ceased to be a major part of European society. The period after about 1600 also witnessed the beginning of what historians call the Consumer Revolution. This term refers to the marked increase in the variety of luxury goods and products available, and their increased consumption by individuals from different economic and social backgrounds. The Consumer Revolution represented a transition from the traditional lifestyle of Europeans characterized by frugality and scarcity to one of increasing mass consumption. It also saw the marketing of goods for individuals as opposed to the entire household, and the marketing of goods as status symbols that were desirable for their aesthetic appeal as opposed to their utility. The consumer society emerged in the 17th century as a result of the development of the Atlantic economy, and intensified throughout the 18th century. This change was propelled by the growing middle class, who embraced new ideas about luxury consumption and the growing importance of clothing and other goods as symbols of social status. The Consumer Revolution manifested itself in several ways. Both the aristocracy and wealthy middle class built vast country estates specifically designed to be comfortable and house the vast quantities of new consumer goods now available. Wealthy people also began to consume more sugar, tobacco, tea, and coffee, all of which were made available by the transatlantic trading network. Sugar consumption, for example, may have increased more than 20% in Britain over the course of the 18th century. Luxury industries such as glass and silk grew as well. In cities such as London, the gentry and prosperous merchants took up residence and created a culture of luxury and consumption. Marketplaces appeared in the cities and catered to these new consumers. These shops started to become important places for wealthy Londoners to meet and socialize, and became popular destinations along with the theater. The increase in consumption among the aristocracy and middle class during the 1600s and 1700s did not go unnoticed. Several writers and economic thinkers tried to justify the increase in desire for luxury goods as something that would in fact contribute to the greater public good. Bernard Mandeville's influential work, The Fable of the Bees, which was published in 1714, argued that the prosperity of a country was tied to the self-interest of the consumer. The work was controversial because its support for selfish consumption of luxury goods was seen as an attack on traditional Christian values of thrift, charity, and generosity. Mandeville and others like him prefigured some of the arguments in favor of free market capitalism that Adam Smith would present in his famous 1776 work, The Wealth of Nations. Many enterprising individuals took advantage of the consumer culture of the early modern period. The pottery innovator and businessman Josiah Wedgwood noticed the way aristocratic fashions, themselves subject to periodic changes in direction, slowly filtered down to the middle class. In response, he pioneered the use of marketing techniques to influence and manipulate the direction of the prevailing tastes and preferences to make his goods more appealing to the aristocracy. Once his products had become fashionable among the nobles and gentry, the newly moneyed middle class soon followed. Wedgwood's business model was followed by producers of a wide range of products, which further added to the growth of the consumer economy. Warfare continued to evolve in the late 17th and 18th centuries. The process of centralization of political power in the hands of monarchs had largely been completed by the 18th century. The state now recruited, supplied, and trained large armies consisting of highly trained professional soldiers. Though professionals, regular soldiers were not highly regarded in society and were paid and treated poorly for their services. Most soldiers were recruited from the poor working class. Many of them were unproductive members of society who had nowhere else to turn. Harsh discipline and strict rules were used to control the working class soldiers. The officers in the army were all aristocrats, whose education, background, and family connections supposedly made them more naturally suited for command. They had better equipment, higher social status, and often rode horses in battle to reflect their elevated positions. Compared to the bloody and violent religious conflicts of the previous century, 18th century warfare tended to be less destructive to civilians in the land. Armies tried to fight limited engagements designed to achieve specific strategic and territorial objectives. Because armies were expensive to create, train, and maintain, generals were reluctant to risk them carelessly in battle, often making warfare a game of movement and position. Keeping supply lines open remained a critical part of war in the 1700s, as armies usually could not carry sufficient quantities of food and ammunition to survive long in the field without reinforcements. Cavalry was used primarily for reconnaissance and to exploit weaknesses in enemy lines. The bulk of the fighting was done by infantry equipped with muskets and wearing bright uniforms to make them easily recognizable in the smoky chaos of the battlefield. Because weapons were still limited in accuracy, soldiers fought in tightly packed formations and were trained to fire volleys together to maximize their effectiveness. During the early modern period, the paths of Western and Eastern Europe continued to diverge. Since the Black Death, most peasants in Western Europe had gradually become free from serfdom, which legally bound them to stay on the estate of the noble lord and place them under the lord's control. Although serfdom was declining, peasants in the West still had many obligations to their lords, which included payment of special taxes, fees for the use of ovens and mills, and the hated mandatory labor service, called the corvée in France, that required peasants to work a certain amount of time on tasks such as repairing roads and bridges and clearing land. Nevertheless, by the 1400s and 1500s, most peasants in the West were generally free to leave the land and benefited from a series of traditions, sometimes called the moral economy by historians, that protected them against abuses by excessive or cruel landlords. In Eastern Europe, serfdom expanded and became more burdensome during the early modern period. This was due to several factors. The population of nobles was higher in Eastern Europe, and these nobles had much greater power. This enabled them to create laws and regulations that more tightly bound their serfs to them. Eastern Europe did not participate in exploration and colonization, and it did not develop commercial economies such as those in England, the Netherlands, and France. As a result, the middle class was smaller and weaker in Eastern Europe, and large towns and strong kings failed to develop. Eastern Europe remained more sparsely populated and agricultural, and so primarily became a supplier of grain to the rapidly growing populations of Western Europe. To ensure adequate labor and increase agricultural production, landlords in Eastern Europe imposed harsh serfdom on their peasants and demanded additional forced labor without compensation in the form of the robot. Now that we have completed this lesson, examine the questions on this slide. After I finish speaking, pause the video and see if you can answer them based on what you have heard. Use this as a way to help you review for the assessments.